Lecture 4. Of the afflictions that come upon the godly after the pardon of their sins. Romans 3 verses 24 and 25. Being justified freely by his grace, etc. The doctrine about remission of sin being thus particularly declared, we come to that great question, how afflictions come upon the godly after the pardon of their sins. For the Antinomian goeth into one extremity, and the Papist into another. So true is that of Tertullian, Christ is always crucified between two thieves. That is, truth suffers between two extreme errors. Therefore, in prosecuting this point, which is of great practical concernment, I will lay down first what the Antinomian saith, secondly, what the Papist, and lastly, what the Orthodox. The Antinomian in his book, called The Honeycomb of Justification, explaineth himself in these particulars, by which you may judge that his honey is gall. Having made this objection to himself, that the children of God are corrected by God, therefore he seeth sin in them, maketh a large answer, distinguishing first of afflictions, calling some legal, and some evangelical, and then he distinguisheth of persons, making some unconverted, others converted, and the unconverted again. He makes to be either such as are reprobate or else elected. Now, saith he, the legal crosses have a twofold operation, either vindictive, or corrective. Vindictive are such afflictions as God executeth upon the wicked and reprobates, in which sense God is called the God of vengeance. Corrective are such lashes of the law as are executed upon those persons that are the children of God by election, but not yet converted, and so under the law. Therefore these afflictions are not in wrath to confound them, but in mercy to prepare them to their conversion. For God, seeing sins in them, layeth crosses upon them. Now, these elect persons he calls unconverted, actively and declaratively, in a very ambiguous and suspicious manner, as if conversion were from all eternity, as well as justification, so that, as they say, a man in time is justified only declaratively, being indeed so from all eternity. Thus he must be said to be converted. And if this be true, then it will likewise follow that a man in heaven is glorified, likewise only declaratively, but actually and indeed glorified from all eternity, even while he is in this miserable house of clay. In the next place, he comes to evangelical crosses, which fall upon them that are actively and declaratively, as he calls it, converted, and these he denieth expressly to be for their sins. For this were, saith he, to deny Christ's satisfactory punishment, because by his death, we have not one spot of sin in us. Therefore he makes them to be only the trial of their faith, and to exercise their faith, so that by his divinity, when a godly man is afflicted, the flesh would indeed persuade a man hath sin in him. But this is to try whether thou canst believe thou art cleansed from sin for all these afflictions. Therefore, if a man yield to his temptation, that is, that he hath sin in him when he is afflicted, what is this, saith he, but to deny Christ and his blood? Think you this to be the voice of the Scriptures? Hence he laboureth to show that 12 absurdities would follow from this doctrine of God's afflicting his children for their sins, the strength of which shall be in his place considered. I have now only laid down his judgment and made the doctrine of the Protestants, opposing this to be popish, and confounding the law and the gospel together. Hence, intending the Protestant authors and ministers, he saith, they paint God like an angry father, ever seeing sin in us, and ever standing with a rod and staff in his hand lifted up over our heads, by reason he seeketh sins in us. He is ever ready, though not to strike us down, yet to crack our crowns and sorely to whip us. Whereas the gospel describeth him to be not only a loving Father, but also our well-pleased Father, at perfect peace with us, so that the upshot of his position is to show that they are taskmasters and do degenerate to the legal teaching of the Old Testament. Whosoever preach that God doth correct believers for their sins, and I have, saith he, somewhat the more largely hunted this fox, because it is so nourished not only by the Papists, but also by some of us Protestants, who, lisping the language of Ashdod, do undermine the very roots of the Lord's vine. And that you may see it is not one man's judgment amongst them. See what their great general faith see what their great general saith, in a sermon, page 162. Know this, that at that instant, when God brings affliction upon thee, he doth not remember any sin of thee. They are not in his thoughts towards thee. Again, whatsoever things befall the children of God are not punishments for sins. They are not remembrances of sin. And if men or angels shall endeavor to contradict this, let them be accounted as they deserve. Thus the Antinomian. The Papist goeth into another extremity, for thus they hold Bellar lib 4 cap 1, that when God hath forgiven a sin, yet it is according to his justice that the sinner should suffer or do something to satisfy this justice, not in respect of the sin as it is against God, for although some say so, yet others reject it, but in respect of some temporal punishment, either in this life or in the life to come, which is the ground of purgatory. And that this may be made good, they say, when God doth forgive a sin, he doth not presently remit the temporal punishment. Therefore men may by some satisfactory penalties voluntarily take upon themselves, rescue themselves from these temporal punishments. Now, this is a doctrine extremely derogating from the full satisfaction of Christ's death, as the Orthodox show against the Papists. Therefore, in the third place, the truth is that God, when he forgiveth a sin or sinners, he doth likewise take off all the temporal punishment, properly so called, that is, in order to any vindictive justice, as if a further supply were to be made to Christ's sufferings by what we endure. Yet we say withal that God indeed doth take notice of the sins of those that are justified, and doth correct them for them, so that when he chastiseth them, it is in reference to their sins. They are the occasion or the impulsive cause, as we may say, though improperly when we speak of God. Although the final cause and the end why God doeth so is not to satisfy his justice, but for other ends. It is doubtful whether we may call them punishments or no. But we need not litigate about the word. I see Chemnitis and Rivet calls them so. And if we make a distinction on God's end why he afflicts the godly for their sins, from that when he punisheth the wicked, though both for their sins, we speak the truth fully enough. Though we call them punishments, and certainly the words punish or punishment used, Hosea 4:19, Ezekiel 9:13, Leviticus 26:41, do not take the word punishment in such a strict sense. The Greek word oslatis is used of the damned angels and men, 2 Peter 2:9, Matthew 25, verse 46. And this word seems not applicable to the afflictions of God's people for their sins, and so the word pueo seemeth to be an act of some judge, who doth not stand to mercy. Puogo, soy, bantho, soy, pumago, se, tanti, tit, basanitzo, sudias, invoke. But the word arinein, to judge, is attributed to God when he doth correct his children, 1 Corinthians 11:31, where the apostle useth three words in an elegant paronomasia, arinein, diakrinein, and kata aredzo. So then, when God doth afflict his people, he may be said to do it as judge, and afflictions are called judgments, 1 Peter 4:17. Only when God doth thus correct and punish his people, he is paternus judex, a fatherly judge. But the most expressive word of these afflictions is paidein, which denoteth God afflicting his people as a father his child. And although he doeth it because of their faults, yet he hath tenderness in what he doeth. This is the truth, and for the proving of it, consider these propositions.